Well, welcome. I'm Allison Reese with Harp Column, and here with Kimberly Rowe, also of Harp Column, and our special guest today, Katherine Siochi, who we're thrilled to have. And we'll introduce Katherine here in a minute, but just a few things. If you're here, you've probably been here before. Hopefully, you've made it to our other live events each week. This is our last live event. I can't believe it. And so this is the last time that we'll all see each other before the end of our 30-day challenge. Hopefully you're getting those daily emails with our practice tip and our challenge. Make sure you are checking that out on Friday. We'll name our last prize winners for the month. Each week we give away prizes, and just by being a part of the challenge, you're entered to win. So check that Friday email out for the last group of prize winners.
And Allison, also, I want to remind everybody to check out the last email, January 30th, because we have a special gift for everyone. So you don't want to miss
Ooh,
that.
what a tease. What a teaser, Kim. Yeah, definitely see it through to the end. Everybody's so close, and you should pat yourself on the back for making it this far. And we just have a few days left. But Kim, do you want to introduce our special guest today?
Sure. So we are thrilled to welcome Katherine Siochi, who I have known for a very long time. And Katherine was the gold medal winner in the 11th USA, or 10th or 11th?
10. Yeah,
10th, sorry.
10.
10th USA International Harp Competition. So she knows an awful lot about practicing and preparing for big events. And she is currently the principal harp with the San Francisco Symphony. And she has also been principal harp with the Minnesota Orchestra, the Kansas City Symphony, and the Sarasota Orchestra. So, Katherine, way to go. It's amazing to see everything you've done. So we're really happy to have you here. We also featured Katherine shortly after she won the USA International competition. We featured her in an interview that we're going to paste into the chat if you want to read a little bit more about that. And Katherine, we're just going to dive right in and ask you some questions about practicing and
Great.
performing. Today's tip, because every day we give a tip and an assignment. Today's assignment, because we're nearing the end of the challenge and we're getting a little bit more talking about performing and getting a little farther away from talking about fundamentals. And so today's assignment was to practice performance down to entering the room and taking a bow and just all the little things maybe that don't even have to do with playing. So I'd like to ask you, how do you prepare for a performance?
Yeah. Thank you, first of all, so much for having me. I'm honored to be here and to speak with everyone. Um, yeah, it looks a little different, I would say, for solo performance versus like playing with an orchestra. But for a solo performance, definitely having some kind of grounding ritual has always really helped me. So that can look different for everyone, but there have been studies done even like in sports, like athletes have kind of a routine or something they'll do, like for example, before they make a free throw shot, these sorts of rituals that have been proven to actually help with the performance. And so what I started doing for big performances, like kind of in the backstage area, was just to have certain items that are familiar and comforting to me, because I only do that before a performance, and then I actually associate them specifically with kind of getting into that zone. So for me, that's a cup of chamomile tea and having some lavender essential oil to like put on the backs of my wrists. And smell is actually super powerful in terms of like memory association. And so I started doing that before like big solo performances, before orchestra auditions. And it really just kind of puts me into this really focused mindset that I reserve like specifically for those events. In terms of more, I guess, practical advice, I would say before a performance, the number one thing you want to avoid if you're in a warm up room is doing full run throughs of your piece or your pieces if you're doing like a full recital or multiple pieces, because that is the unfortunately a critical time where if you're trying to do a run through, you could get in your head about certain things. So just to give an example, say you're running a piece right before, and then you have like a pedal memory slip in a certain spot, and then you keep like running that spot over and over. Right before a performance, you're realistically not going to be able to problem solve and troubleshoot that. And then you're just going to be thinking about it when you go out on stage, right? So instead of doing run throughs, I recommend actually doing slower practice and not even like big sections of pieces, just sort of like pick a part of your piece that's a nice warm up. So maybe something with like arpeggios, or if I'm doing an audition, maybe like a cadenza slowed down, just to get your fingers moving on familiar notes that you are about to play, but not in the same context that it's going to be in your performance. Because I used to do that, and then I would hit certain spots and then just have this mental block around it. And then that would always hurt me afterwards in the performance. So take something in your piece and play it slowly, because your main goal before is to just have physically warmed up fingers, and you need to trust that all of the work you've done in the months leading up to that is going to serve you on the stage. But that 15-30 minutes before is not going to change anything, right, at that point. So trust the work that you've already done and focus more on using that time just to have a comforting kind of grounding ritual and get your fingers moving. And then as you sort of go right before the performance into the backstage area, you might have, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes. I use that time to do really slow, deep breathing just to try to lower my heart rate. And it gives me the biggest benefit of that, even more so than relaxing my heart rate and sort of alleviating shaky hands, which I struggle with. The biggest benefit for me with slow, deep breathing is that it gives you something really specific to focus on that is not what you're about to play. Because if you're obsessing over that, it's more likely to make you nervous. Whereas if you're focusing on your breath, in a way, it's a helpful distraction, but I mean that in a positive way. Um, that really calms and grounds you. And then going out on stage, the biggest critique I've had for my own students is that you need to make sure your body language is projecting warmth and connection with your audience. So the number one thing you can do to show that is to smile really big. And that's important, especially when you finish your performance and you get up from the harp and you're bowing, is to smile, because no matter what happened, that exhibits sort of gratitude to your audience, and also can trick them into thinking that you were happy with how it went, even if you weren't 100% happy with how it went. That's the biggest thing. And then I think just um, making sure that you're making eye contact with the audience. If you get nervous about actually looking into people's faces, then just pick a point kind of at the back of the hall where you can look with your eyes, so it creates the illusion that you're looking at the audience, but you're actually just looking above them. That, in addition to smiling, I think is a really important way of making your audience feel like you're really engaged with them and you're really connected with them.
These are
So that, yeah.
great performance tips, Catherine.
Yeah, so enlightening.
Yeah, I'm curious to follow up on the first thing you said about having like the lavender and the chamomile tea. Do you ever use those things outside of that environment? So if you
No,
just
exactly. So that's why it works for me because I only use it either, well, in the past, like for orchestra auditions or for big like solo performances, like in the space right before, whether it's like a warm-up room or backstage. And for me, that really like I said, that gets me into the zone, the performance zone or the audition zone, because I don't use those in other contexts. So you could come up with anything that is comforting to you. Like maybe it's a certain song that always puts you in a good mood or kind of like amps you up, like listening to that before. It could be anything that makes you feel positive and calm. It could even be like watching your favorite TV show right before. Like in a weird way, positive distractions can actually benefit your performance because like I said, the one of the worst things to do is to focus too much on what you're about to play and worrying especially about specific spots that you're concerned about in your piece or in your program. So ironically, I do think that some kind of positive distraction beforehand is actually, I've found it personally to be beneficial.
right, yeah, yeah. No, that's really really interesting. Okay, so we're talking a lot now about preparation to perform because we're kind of near the end of this challenge, but throughout this month, obviously we've been
Yeah.
focusing on practicing, and that is, you were saying before we got on here, oh, this is a huge part of what I do, right? You're working on this day in day out. Um, do you have any practice tips or tools or things that you found work really well and effectively for you as you're practicing that you want to share with our guests?
Yeah, it's such a big topic, so it's hard for me to sort of just select a few key points, but I'll do my best to keep it kind of succinct. I would say my kind of practice journey has really evolved over the last, you know, how long have I been playing the harp? 20 some years. um, I was always, maybe this resonates with some of you. I was always a pretty quick learner. Like I could just learn things quickly because I was a good sight reader. I didn't I didn't experience a lot of kind of like resistance and struggle when I started learning the harp. And because of that, I was not a good practicer. And let me explain that in a little more detail. I think things came to me pretty naturally and pretty intuitively, and I would just do them. And I could achieve that by sort of practicing badly. And what I mean by badly is starting at the beginning of your piece and just running it through over and over. It would get into my muscle memory. I could perform it. And that way of practicing worked for me even like in college when I was preparing for the USA competition, um, the AHS competitions, even like my first couple of orchestra auditions. And that was because I was in school and I had so much time to practice. So for any of you who are at like a music school specifically, like so I was at Juilliard. We didn't have a lot of really challenging academic classes. Things were structured to be focused really on performance, having enough time to practice. So then when I started my first job in Sarasota and I was working and gigging and I started teaching and I was having to learn like, new repertoire for orchestra, different rep every week and doing solo recitals and doing chamber music recitals. I was actually so much busier and had less time to practice. And that was when I had to start shifting my approach to practicing. So the number one change I would say that I've made was instead of practicing just playing through sections of pieces and kind of like repeating things until they intuitively got better, I instead had to start prioritizing within a day, like, maybe scheduling, like, okay, I have this free 2 hours during this part of the day. I need to prioritize the either pieces or sections within pieces that are in the most dire shape. So kind of like ranking either entire pieces or passages within a piece in terms of what needed the most immediate attention and starting with those, and then saving maybe things that were more in performance shape that I just need to do a run through, or things that were in better shape, saving those towards like the end of my practice session, because at the beginning I needed to start with things that took a little more like mental effort when my focus was a bit fresher. So that was when things started to shift. And then also like working and taking orchestra auditions at the same time, I really had to be much more intentional with having specific practice goals. And then I would say kind of the next phase of that for me was within the last couple years when I started teaching more and have like been reading more books about pedagogy, etc., in order to help teach my students how to practice. I would say then that gave me even more kind of clarity on how to help my students practice, but also even for me, like further becoming a little more deliberate with my practicing. And so um, a couple of resources that I've in the last year or so found super helpful. There's a book, I don't know if any of the other guests have mentioned this book. There's a book by Molly Gebrian called Learn Faster, Perform Better, where she talks about the neuroscience behind practicing and performance. I highly recommend that to any of you. It's a fascinating read. I think you can blow through it pretty quickly. But that book, and then certain books about teaching. One I really um, like it's called The Intelligent Music Teacher by Robert Duke. I've started to realize more recently sort of the how close of a connection there is between teaching and practicing. And what I mean by that is like when you teach, you're problem solving for your student, right? You're trying to help them figure out how to solve problems. And that's exactly what we do as individuals when we practice. And so I think in the last year or two, I've become even more deliberate with the way I practice, because I've had to sort of think more critically about and analyze other people's playing more. And so just maybe to talk through like briefly that process of deliberate practicing, which is something that Molly talks about in her book. And it's also something that Noah Kageyama, who's a performance psychologist, he teaches at Juilliard, and he has a great podcast called The Bulletproof Musician. Highly recommend his blog and his podcast. They talk about this deliberate practicing model. And so basically, so this is in contrast to run through something until you hit a sticky spot, repeat that spot several times until it just magically gets better. In contrast to that is the deliberate practice model. So the first part of this is to pick a passage that you're wanting to practice, like a phrase or maybe a page of a piece. And the first step is to have a really clear goal for how you ideally want that passage to sound. So how do you want it to come out when you play it? You play the passage. I recommend really the best way to do this is to record yourself, because it's kind of hard to play in real time and also diagnose what exactly you sound like. So I would recommend just use your phone, use a voice memo, record yourself play that passage. Then step two is to describe the issue or the problem that you encounter. So what is it that's not sounding the way you want it to? Um, Specifically, and that's the key part is you have to be specific. You can't just say oh, I'm tired, I'm not focused, so I'm just not doing this well. Identify very specifically, like this measure, this note is late, my rhythm's uneven here, whatever it might be. And that's what recording is really helpful because it's easier to identify the specific problem when you listen back to yourself. So then the third step is try to identify what the underlying cause of that problem is. So is it a technical thing? Videoing yourself is really helpful to catch technical problems, even more so than just audio recording. Like, why can't I do an even slide with my thumb? Oh, it's because my thumb's too low, right? Things like that, whether it's technical or it's mental. Maybe you're not hearing something in your head the way you should before you try to play that passage. So that's the third thing. Try to identify what's causing the problem. Then the fourth part, the final part of this model is to try out, hypothesize a solution for your next attempt, and then try out that solution. So in the example of my thumb slides not even, try to have a higher thumb and a stronger thumb, see if that fixes it. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's uneven for a different reason, like the angle of your arm, whatever it might be. Try out the next solution. It can sometimes the first thing you try is going to fix it. Other times it might take 3 or 4 different experimentations to find what fixes it. But the point is that you are pinpointing exactly what the problem is that you're trying to correct. And then each time you play through that passage, you have a really specific goal for what you're trying to do to fix that problem. So that's the biggest difference between sort of mindless playthroughs and what I'm referring to as deliberate practicing. And I think the longer you've been playing, maybe you do that kind of deliberate practicing without having to really think about it so much, maybe to the level of detail that I just laid out for you. But if you're teaching or if you're a younger student, I think it's super helpful to think about it in that sort of concrete way. Um, because then you're not wasting your time. Like one analogy that I've used with my students is like if you're ever in an orchestra rehearsal and you have a conductor who says, "Okay, can we play this passage again?" and you repeat it, but they didn't tell you why you're doing it again or what to do differently. It feels like they're wasting your time and it can be really annoying. But so often we do that to ourselves. Like we're wasting our own time if we're just playing through something without identifying like what is the reason or what is the intention and what are we trying to do differently specifically um in that next sort of trial. So that's my biggest piece of advice. There's so many other things we could talk about relating to practicing, but I think that's a huge just mindset shift
Catherine,
that
this
I've
is
experienced.
yeah, no, this is just amazing. Your insight is just incredible. Thinking things through to that level of detail. We have a couple questions in the chat. Do you mind if I chime in with some of
Yes,
those?
totally.
Um, I'm curious. We had been talking with some of the other guests. Some people kept a practice journal and some didn't. So somebody is asking where you fall on that. Do you keep one?
Yeah, I don't. So this is the thing, like when you with practicing or anything in life or habits, the best habit is the one you're actually going to do. So for me, that doesn't look like a hard copy practice journal because sometimes I practice at home, sometimes I practice at my different work locations. I just use the notes app on my phone. Same with like recording a voice memo. I don't use like a fancy microphone because the tool that's like most accessible and easy with the least barriers for you to use is the most effective one, whatever that is for you. So for me, it usually just looks like each day, like first of all, like I have to have a time block or blocks scheduled to practice. Otherwise, I struggle to actually follow through. Um, I know it's different for everyone, but mainly it'll just look like on my notes app on my phone, I'll list like again in order of like how dire of shape something is in, the things that I need to cover that day. And then the important part with that I've struggled with is not feeling guilt around not sticking exactly to your plan, right? Because it can be so easy to have this elaborate schedule and be like, okay, for 20 minutes, I'm going to do this excerpt. And then for 30 minutes, I'm going to work on the last 2 pages of this thing. And like, inevitably, something's going to get thrown off in your day. The fact that you even went in with a plan and achieved something is already a big accomplishment. So just being able to sort of give yourself grace when you don't stick exactly to the plan or didn't get around to everything that was on your list, I think is super important because otherwise you can kind of fail to recognize what you did accomplish and just focus on like beating yourself up like, oh, I didn't do this whole list. But the fact that you even made the list all automatically means your practicing is going to be more intentional and more structured.
Great advice. Um, Somebody was asking, how do you keep finding inspiration in playing things like excerpts that become very repetitive?
Yeah, with excerpts, that's definitely a challenge. I've, let's see, my first audition was like 11 years ago. So over the last 11 years, yeah, I've taken many auditions and have to revisit the same excerpts with each audition. And the thing for me that really kept it interesting was each time, maybe there were in some cases 1 to 3 years between these auditions. Each time I came back to it, I tried to elevate it and take it to the next level. And so I noticed kind of this evolution in my excerpts. Like, just to give an example, there's this one excerpt by Stravinsky, Symphony in Three Movements. And the second movement has this really annoying part with like 30-second notes, a staccato left hand and 30-second notes kind of going above that. And I was using a fingering that my teacher gave me, and I did that for my first couple auditions. And then I started recording myself listening. I was like, I don't like that my second note in my left hand, it's marked staccato in the score, but it's not staccato with this fingering that I was given. So how can I find a way to make this more faithful to what's printed on the page? So I tried out different fingerings and I came up with a new fingering that fixed the articulation and also was more accurate. So like things like that, you will come to find like as you keep playing even the same excerpts, when each time you come back to them, try to find something that you want to do better or something you want to improve. And often it's about finding a new creative solution to that passage. And I know this is a little harder if you're in college or you're in school where, especially if you have a teacher who really wants you to just abide by their fingerings, then you have less flexibility with that. Although you can still try to, each time you play the excerpt, like find new things to improve. But especially once you're out on your own and you've graduated, like I've reworked so many fingerings each time I come back to an excerpt to either make them easier, more consistent in an audition, etc. So I think you'll start to actually find it's kind of fun and it's a fun challenge to see like what can I do this time with this excerpt to really bring it to the next level, or like what have I always struggled with in this excerpt, or what have I always kind of not been happy with, and playing around with solutions to um try to just bring it to the next level.
Yeah, good advice, Catherine. Um, so we are running out of time here, so I think we need to wrap up. But this is our last week of the challenge. Everybody who's doing this only has a few days left. Um, But after the challenge, do you have any advice for how people can stay motivated to continue practicing consistently throughout the year?
Yeah, I mean, motivation is a whole nother topic. I definitely struggle a lot with motivation. For me, the hardest part is just to start practicing. And something that really helps me and that you all could try is to start really small. So for me, if I often it's because I'm really overwhelmed because I literally have too much music to practice and I'm feeling really down and don't even want to start because it feels so daunting. Just I tell myself I'm just gonna tune my harp because that's something you can do. It's easy to do, and you've achieved something that you needed to do. 9 times out of 10, after I've tuned my harp, then I feel like sitting down and practicing, and then I'll practice for longer. But it's just the getting started part that's I think the biggest hurdle in a lot of cases. Um, in terms of like consistency throughout the year, I mean, I think it's really important if you're it depends on, if you're in school, if you're out of school, what kind of access you have to different to other harpists and other performers, but it's super important to stay connected with other harpists, whether that's I'll say it's easier at school because that's built into your way of life, but going to performances, going to conferences, things like that really help to sort of just inspire you, introduce you to different perspectives, different ways of playing. I've always found that to be really motivating. I think it's much harder to be motivated if you're isolated. So I would just encourage everyone to things like this, for example, are a great example of just being involved with the harp community. But for me, always the biggest inspiration was like hearing other performers who did things that I couldn't do and just thinking about what is it that they're doing that I'm maybe wanting to aim for or achieve in my own practicing. So that's probably my biggest general advice in terms of finding motivation.
Thank you, Catherine. That's amazing. Such really, really, really good advice. Um, well, I think it is probably time for us to wrap up. Allison, anything else we need to let people know?
Um, no, I don't think so, other than just to keep practicing these last 5 days of the practice challenge. Keep an eye on your email. Catherine, thank you so much for so much great advice and wisdom. I feel like we could have probably listened to you talk all day. Um, so we really appreciate all that you had to share with us today.
Yeah, thank you
Of
so
course,
much,
it's
Catherine.
my pleasure and thanks for having me.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for coming
Yeah, thanks
today and to coming to
everyone.
all of our live events all month. This has been so much fun for us. And it's just been really exciting to see so many people taking part of the challenge. Kim, do you have any idea what our final number was?
I didn't look it up today.
Oh, shoot, I put you on the spot. I shouldn't have.
The last time
But
I checked, it was almost 800. So,
yeah,
yeah,
which is a record. So I
yeah.
think this is
Amazing.
our biggest year yet of practice challenge participants. So pat yourselves on the back. Well done.
Yeah,
Well
thanks
done.
everyone, and
All right.
especially
Thank you,
Catherine.
everybody. Good luck the
Thank
rest of the month.
you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Catherine.
You're
Bye.
welcome.